Alright, this is an impromptu, unannounced live video. I should have probably done this properly and officially announced what I'm going to do, but I didn't. So, you all can watch this at your leisure. Even though it's not live, it'll be okay. Let me adjust some things for some people that may pop up, and then we'll hop right in. Let's see here. There we go. Alright. Let's get rid of that. Anybody who feels like they need to say something, I will try and respond, although I won't be paying attention to the screen as much as I will this. What is this, you ask? Alright. What we have here is the newest upcoming release from H&S Games, Soldiers of the Sun. Let me pull this down where you can see it. There we go. Soldiers of the Sun. That's going to be the cover. Not bad in my humble opinion, as I'm the one that designed it. So Soldiers of the Sun, the 7th release from H&S Games. And how you guys doing, by the way? Good? Good. Let's get to it, shall we? A lot to cover. What is Soldiers of the Sun? Soldiers of the Sun is an infantry based game that takes place in the Pacific during World War II, squad level. And as you may or may not have noticed, right off the bat, no map. Where's the map? There isn't one. It's not required. It's not going to be needed. There's other ways to go about this. I wanted to do something a little different. That's not to say that this no map mechanic hasn't been addressed before. Of course, you've got things like up front and a couple other people coming along testing out the concept, such as this gentleman, Mr. Tom Russell, with Table Battles. A different era, but again, same concept. And kind of liked the idea, so I thought I'd run with it. And it presented somewhat of a challenge to me as well, as far as how to make this thing work. And I think I pretty much nailed it. So let's start with what you're looking at here, and then we'll go into the particulars. So again, you've got teams, each tile, and these are, let me reach one over here. These are 1.5-inch square tiles. Americans, Japanese, each one representing either a team or a leader. And 3 teams make up a squad, 3 squads make up a platoon. You will never have more than a single platoon on each side, so you've got fairly low counter density going on. This is chit draw as far as activation goes to determine who goes first, second, third, etc. during a turn. I guess I should add, you also have your, what I'm fond of calling sudden death, your sudden death chits. So draw 1, draw 2, no problem, but once you draw the third one, the turn is effectively ended regardless of whether or not you have achieved what you hoped to achieve during that turn. So what allows us to do away with a map? If you'll notice up here, you have, for lack of a better term, vertical margin markers, and on the left, horizontal margin markers. Noted for your convenience, for range, and that allows, with these columns and these rows, the formation of a kind of implied, or if you will, imaginary grid that these things maneuver across and use for range when it comes to firing, etc. Rule book isn't too thick. You're looking at about 16 pages. No more, no less. And as far as hardcore rules go, I think you only got about 13 pages of stuff, and that's including some examples, pictures, diagrams, etc. that take up quite a bit of space. So there's probably really only about 10 pages of rules that need to be digested. You have things that you will need to do. This is slated to be print and play. In fact, I guarantee it'll be print and play. I'm considering pumping out a few Ziploc editions as well, but we'll see how that goes. Definitely going to be print and play though, at the least. Here's your Japanese counter sheet as it stands. I've also designed these counters as well, and your Americans as it stands. And you all know the drill. Goes without saying, the things that you see here are subject to change at any point. Not too drastically, but if during play testing, etc., something needs to be tweaked, going to have to tweak it. Information counter sheet as it stands. These things will need to be mounted. And when it comes to mounting, if I could take a brief segue into that subject, I don't typically mount counters the traditional way. I use blocks and kind of paste the labels, print them off, cut them and paste the labels with a cheap glue stick onto the blocks such that the labels are easy to remove. But what I got here is the backing that goes into a, like say for a comic book, say you get a bag, it comes with a backboard for a comic book. Now I'm sure you can buy these, in fact I know you can, in bulk. Why would you want to do that? Because these things are perfect. Now you take one, not so good, but you take two, the thickness is just ideal. And you're going to need some of what I've become very fond of, Scotch Super 77. Now do not use this in your house unless you want to be unconscious for 72 hours. It may be 77. I guess that's why they call it Super 77. Because if you breathe any of this in, you're going to lose consciousness for 77 hours. So use this outside. Spray each side of your backing board, or whatever these are called. Stick them together. You have counters, the thickness of a counter. I mean, perfect. Then you're going to spray again and put your counter sheet on it, and then just scissor them out. It's not overly involved. People that are scared of doing this, nonsense. Overcome your fear and mount counters. So that's what I did here, and I have to say it's worked out fantastically. I mean, the counters here, the thickness, the feel, I like them better than half the counters that come in, some of these games that you get recently. But anyway, here's some other counters that you'll be mounting, and they'll look thusly. So that's that. A couple other things you're going to have. You're going to have quick reference sheet. You're going to have sequence of play. Looks rather involved, does it not? You can cut this in half if you use one of the included scenarios. Regarding the scenarios, this game was not initially designed to come with scenarios, so in a kind of reduction or minimalist approach, no map, no scenarios, I thought, as much as I want to do this, I think people are just going to feel ripped off if they don't see scenarios included. So we got 6 scenarios in here for you. But coming back to your sequence of play, you cut this in half by using a scenario. Now, half of the other stuff you'll be required to run through when you don't use a scenario. Now, why would you do that? Because it's fun and exciting. Running through this stuff, creating a scenario on the fly, randomly, unpredictably, it's a blast. Seriously, that's why. You also will have, speaking of scenarios, and these are going to change as far as aesthetic, but that's what we're looking at currently. 6 of those. And then one of the 3, having no map is one in my opinion, interesting, distinctive aspect of this game. But there's really three distinctive, interesting aspects, in my most humble opinion, regarding SOS, or Soldiers of the Sun. This is the other one, alright? This is your battle board, and we'll be coming back to this in a second. But that is it's probably the second most important thing, and then the other being, I guess, combat. We'll get to all that. So what I'm going to do is run through some of the rules here. Not everything, obviously. I'm not going to go into depth on anything at this point. When you guys watch this, and as we move forward between now and Christmas, this thing's slated to come out on Christmas. If you have questions about particular aspects of this game, we can focus more on that as we go. That being said, let's run through some of the rules, shall we? Looks like we have one viewer. Not bad for unannounced. Alright. So the scenarios cover Guadalcanal. But regardless of the scenarios, you can pretty much recreate any number of battles that would typically occur during this period in that theater, that being Pacific Theater. Granted, you're not going to have naval stuff, but the small infantry combat can't go wrong. In fact, a book that I've been reading, Touched with Fire, I believe is the name of it, much to my pleasure, reinforced what I was trying to do here with this game, because I thought, I want to do something low counter density. I want to do something the overall aesthetic here is minimal. And everything I've been reading in this book regarding the battles that would typically take place on some of these islands, or many of these islands, was small unit action, hit and run stuff, not big, huge hordes of soldiers, long, drawn-out, protracted battles. Yes, you had some of that, but that wasn't your typical everyday conflict that would occur. You more often than not had these small unit run-ins, patrols, etc. that would take place. And this system is perfect for recreating just that. Let's look at a counter, or as I call it, tile. Again, these are 1.5" sized tile. In depth, what you have here is firepower. This is a team. That's his range. That is his maneuverability. Is not his movement allowance. He cannot move 3, he can move 1. What you're going to do with this factor is roll 1 dice 6, add this number to it. If you attain a certain number, he can move. Sounds like a drag, but it's not. In fact, more often than not, you will be able to move. But there is that tiny possibility of not being able to move. Why? I don't know that I need to go over this, but I will. Why would somebody not be able to move? It's an abstracted way of trying to account for that which you can't account for in a battle, the chaos, etc. Oftentimes we forget that we want these guys to do what we want when we want them to do it. That wasn't always the case. You know, maybe he couldn't move for any number of reasons. Maybe he was unwilling to move for any number of reasons. So it's an abstract way of trying to account for that. Enough said about that. That's his morale. Nothing new there. And his unit ID, which is extremely important when it comes to that cost of activation table, which we'll be getting to. That is your team. We also have leaders. And you say, Jason, now how am I going to know what's a team and a leader? That's easy. You got your rank there and only 2 stats. That's his command range. That's his morale. Easy enough. I already went over team composition, 3 teams to a squad, 3 squads to a platoon. You're going to have battles with 1 squad, 2 squads, 3 squads. It all varies depending on the scenario, or depending on your random scenario generation there. You have things like weather to take into consideration. Again, if you're using a scenario that is determined for you. If not, you need to roll for it. And the weather can consist of clear or rain, so pretty simple there. Squad leaders in particular, I've already touched on them, but they do have a command range. They do not pay a cost to activate. That'll come into play later as I describe things. And like teams, they can activate up to twice a turn. And regarding command, it is in your distinct interest to be in command. If you're not, you can only activate once per turn as opposed to potentially activating twice. In addition to that, there is a, and we're getting to this, bear with me, but there is a cost to activate. If you're out of command, you will need to pay the current cost to activate plus 1 dice 6. So it's much better to stay in command than not. Stacking, the only stacking we got going on here is a leader who can stack with a team. That is it. You can move through friendly teams, but you can't stop or stack on a team. Tile layout, whether you play a scenario or generate your own, you may notice on the left here some dice that I've laid out. Pausing here because I don't know when this started, but I'm noticing that the Wi-Fi is acting funky, and that's always fun. Alright, we back. Wi-Fi skipped on me, so we'll keep an eye on that. I'm not sure at what point I got cut off, or even if I did get cut off. Ha on me. But anyway, on the left here is what I was getting at. You'll see the dice set up, and this is not required. This was only done for purposes of this demonstration. Well, what does this represent? So, when you start, you're going to randomly determine where teams are laid out. One team per column at start. These are your columns, represented by column margins up here and the horizontal range markers on the left, which, when you form an imaginary line, comprises a implied grid, if you will, upon which these guys maneuver, etc. So when you roll 1 dice 6, on a 1, 2, or 3, you're going to start at range 3. On a 4 and a 5, you're going to start at range 2, which is further in. And on a 6, you're going to start at range 1, which is even further in. Obviously, you're going to begin more often than not at range 3, etc. And least often, you will be starting at range 1. Nobody ever starts at range 0, which I guess is kind of a misnomer, but that's what we're calling it. Same with the Japanese. You're going to determine randomly where they start, range 3, 2, or 1, and go from there. Force strength is determined for you if you're playing a scenario. If not, you will randomly determine what you're up against, what you have. That can be, again, anywhere from 1 squad, 2 squads, to 3 squads. The initiative chits, nothing new here. You all familiar with that? Will help determine who goes first during a turn, who goes second, third, etc. You also have the dreaded sudden death turn shits. First one picked, not a problem. Second one drawn, not a problem. Once you draw the third one, the turn is over, regardless of whether or not you have done everything you had hoped to do in that turn. Let's see. The length of turns is determined for you, obviously, by a scenario. If not, you will randomly determine that if you're not playing a scenario. Now let's pull out this bad boy here, this battle track, which is probably, other than having no map, the most interesting thing this game has to offer, in my opinion. The less interesting stuff first, your weather and night track to help keep track of what's what. Turn track, of course, victory point track, and then your activation point track. So each team that you start with gets 1 activation point, but then you're going to roll to determine if he gets an additional activation point. So if you have 3 teams, you're guaranteed 3 activation points. You could have as much as 6, however, depending on your rolls. Mark those, and then you're going to randomly place for each side a corresponding activation marker, which is what these are, for each team in play. So Team 13 would have corresponding 13 activation marker. You're going to randomly place these beginning on the 1 space and move on up. Once you do that, you will know how much the current cost is to activate each team. So for instance, Team 4, which is represented on the field of battle here, only costs 1 activation point to activate. However, Team 9, which is represented here on the battlefield, costs 6 points to activate. Let's see. Let's say, for sake of a few examples, let's say Team 4 wants to activate. It costs 1 point to do so. Pull this chit, this Team 4 activation chit, over. Scoot everybody down to the left. If he wants to activate again this turn, it now costs 6 activation points to do so. Keep in mind you're going to be adjusting the cost of activation, the points, keeping track of them on your track so you know how much you have left to work with as the turns go on. But you may also notice that now, whereas for instance it costs Team 9 6 points to activate, it now costs Team 9 5, etc. and on down. So that's how that works. Cycle through each time. A couple of ways you can do this actually. At the beginning of the very first turn, you can place these face down as such, and then starting with the cheapest, flip it over, and that'll let you know who's going to activate. That can help preserve, or I should say add some fog of war element. Now there's no point in doing it after you flip everybody over, and then flipping them over again is useless because the cycle at which they activate doesn't change. So once you get a feel for the cycle, the order in which they activate, there's no point in pretending that you don't know who's going to activate next. So that only works for the initial turn, but it's still, I think, fairly interesting. So that's how that works. Same for the Americans at your activation table. Any questions? Good. No, I'm sure there's probably questions, and I rolled through that fairly quickly, but we can come back to that at some point down the road. That's your battle track. And it's all in the rules here for you. I already stated that a leader can activate for free during the squad leader phase at the beginning of a turn, or they can, if they choose, simultaneously activate with a team when the team activates. Again, it will be free for the leader to do so. What are the actions that you can do, you say? Let's say I activate somebody. What now? What can I do? Well, you can move, which we already discussed how that takes place. Additionally, when you move and at game start, you will be rolling to randomly determine the cover. Now, I don't need to reiterate this, but I'm going to. This is a game. There are aspects in here that are gamey. This isn't real life. That said, you are not going to know ahead of time to what extent the effectiveness of the cover that you're going to get. So when you move, you roll a die. You could be in the open, you could be in cover, you could be in partial cover. If you're in cover one turn and you move up, you want to move back because you were in cover, you're rolling, you may not be able to move back to the cover you were in. And I don't think that's so much of a stretch either, because in my opinion, when you're talking about anywhere between 40 to 50 meters here, to assume that a guy who was just in cover moves about 40 meters, moves about 40 meters back, to assume that he will be able to move back to the exact same spot that he was in, I think that's a stretch. So, it doesn't take much by way of imagination to consider that. There are all kinds of variables always in effect, always at play, that manipulate your ability, person who's on the battlefield's ability to do what they want to do. You can fire, of course, nothing surprising there. Fire is done without buckets of dice, as I'm known to want to do, but not this time around. You've got 2d10, that's all you need. If you get a different color for each die, that is preferable in my opinion. Typically I use red for the Japanese, blue for the US. And if you are, for sake of example, if this American team is within range of this Japanese team, what is the range here? 1, 2, 3. He has a range of 3, so yeah, he's in range. Now, granted, this team is in cover, so roll the dice. What do we got here? We have the Japanese rolled a 2. The Americans rolled a 5. The Japanese are in cover, full cover at that. So you're going to add 2 to that 2 roll and get 4, which does exist on here, I promise. There's your 4. But the Americans are going to add a firepower of 3 to that 5, so they get an 8. The difference between the two is 4 factors, so this team is pinned. There's your pin marker. If the team is already pinned and they received an additional pin result, they would then become broken. Now, if the difference between these two dice was 5 or greater, this team would go bye-bye, effectively eliminating the team. So that's how combat works there. Line of sight has changed significantly during development. Line of sight was originally handled in the same way that cover was. Every time you move, at the end of your move, you roll for cover, you roll for line of sight. I won't get into it now, but make a long story short, had to axe that. Various reasons. The main function of line of sight now is to separate squads, so they act as a kind of in-between squad margin, and it also allows us to maintain a kind of tactical puzzle aspect regarding line of sight. You wanted to have it in here. I thought of chucking it completely, but didn't want to do that. So at least you have it in here to an extent, but not to such an extent that is unrealistic, which is really what it was originally. Reaction fire is in here, no surprise, as it should be, or opportunity fire, however you prefer. It's referred to as reaction fire in this game. If an enemy unit moves within a certain range, you can conduct reaction fire. Assault is in here as well, as it should be. You can also pass, and for I'm missing a guy. A number of these information markers are going to be used throughout the game. You also have your fired and moved markers. So if a unit fires, mark it as fired. If a unit moves, mark it as moved. Once they perform their second action, if that's the case, simply flip it sideways. That represents being spent or having conducted 2 actions in a turn. What else do we have? You guys asleep out there yet? We're about halfway done. Maybe about 3/4 of the way done. Combat results, touched on briefly, can be pinned, broken, or eliminated. Now if a leader is fired at, there's a possibility he could be wounded. That's nothing new either. I've used this in at least a game or 2 prior to this. I really like it. I guess that's why I keep using it. And when it comes to firing, again, range is, in my opinion, fairly straightforward. You're going to count. And when you determine the alignment of a team, you just count up. So if he was going to fire here, that's 1, 2, 3. You can also add, which is one of the reasons, or the only reason perhaps, to number these margins on the left to prevent having to do that, which is what I just did. 2 and 1 is 3, range 3. If you want to fire over here, that's 1 column over, add 1, range 4. That's it. Nothing hard there. And fire support is in here as well. I've come to learn a couple of things about wargamers, and I've come to learn that, being one myself, if something is overly complicated, you're going to tend not to use it as much or not at all. fire support represented in games has a tendency to be just that, unnecessarily and overly complicated. There's no reason for it. I'd like to think that I found a decent balance for fire support in here. It's not too simple, but again, it's not so overly convoluted rules-wise that you just want to avoid using it, and that shouldn't be the case. Fire support is important to this game and should be used. So that's in here, and it's in here in a way that that you actually want to use it. Mortars, bazookas, flamethrowers are in here as well. Support weapon malfunction is always a possible outcome. With your machine guns, they can run out of ammo, they can overheat, they can jam. Flamethrowers can run out of fuel, and bazookas can run out of ammunition. Wouldn't be a Pacific Theater game without Banzai. Banzai charges are in here. Represented in a non-scenario, build your own scenario game via random event, and that's listed. Random events are listed under the optional rules, which I'm yet to get to. But in the scenario, I think there's at least one for sure where the Japanese start out Banzai charge after Banzai charge each turn, just roll in human waves at you. Fun if you're the Japanese, but kind of hectic if you're the Americans. You've got your compact, concise AI here for the Japanese. Again, it's something that works, but it's not something you spend so much time on. It takes away from the game. There's a flow to things, and games are no different. And if you have to stop to focus too long on a particular part of a game, it interrupts the flow. You forget what you're doing. It's just a drag. So I wanted to make this solo because that's how I play all of my games. I'm fond of it myself, and I've come to find that many of you as well appreciate it, so gotta have it in here. And again, it's in here, but not to such an extent that it detracts from the flow of the game, so that was important as well. Also, I should add, this cost of activation track really does work hand in hand with the AI of the Japanese, because if nothing else, when you want to determine tiebreakers for who to activate or a particular target, just go for the one that costs the least to activate. So if there is an equal opportunity to activate somebody, there's no greater or lesser reason to do so for one or the other. Obviously, you're going to activate the cheaper one. Similarly, with the targets, when you're firing at an enemy, if one target's as good as another, which one to fire at? Well, fire at the one that would cost the Americans the least to activate during the next turn. Simple enough. Night rules are in here. May have to chop them down a bit at this point, right there in here. And then your victory conditions. Now again, your scenarios are going to list those for you. But you have a number of victory, up to 6 different victory conditions that you could have as you build your own scenario on the fly. And then your optional rules. So yes, I have smoke as an optional rule. I don't want to have that argument right now. Random events, weapon transfer, your blind IJA activation, which I think I already demonstrated with the starting the counters face down and then beginning from left to right, flipping one over at a time as the units activate. And your flanking rules. So that is effectively it with this game. And again, I think that's like 13 pages of hard rules that need to be digested. And again, you've got some diagrams and pictures in here that take up a lot of space. So maybe 10 pages of rules that you got to learn with this thing. What else we got here? Did I show you this stuff? If I'm repeating myself, I think I am. I already showed you this, right? Japanese counters, yeah. US counters. I'm just making sure I remember everything here. And your info counters. I was positive I already showed you that, but I wanted to make sure that was not forgotten. And I think that's it. Again, December 25th release on this. That is Christmas, of course. Nobody should be surprised if come to find that life isn't perfect and the release has to be delayed, but I don't see that happening, to be honest with you. This thing's ready to go. We just need to make sure these scenarios work. And you may not see it, but I'm going to point out to you on these scenarios. When I look at a scenario, one of these, there's about 6 different knobs that need to be adjusted. You got your volume, your bass, your treble, your mid-range. These things have to jive just right or it doesn't sound right. Well, you know, same with these scenarios. At this point, I need to determine if the amount of turns are long enough, or are there too many turns, you know, all that stuff. So we got all that fun stuff to tweak. But once we get that done and the rules tightened up, this thing's ready to go. So Soldiers of the Sun is what we're talking about, and it's been a lot of fun developing this first Pacific Theater game for us, for H&S Games, and that's about it. So again, as you guys watch this, if you have any questions, feel free to post, and we'll focus on particular aspects of the game. You can follow the action at Board Game Geek under Soldiers of the Sun, also H&S Games on Facebook, as I post developments, news, etc. regarding the game. You guys can stay informed. Let me know what you think, suggestions, complaints, comments, etc. I always answer, so feel free to do so. That's it. I'm going to cut you guys loose, and I just wanted to share that with you, so I will talk to you next time.